They can read that on the screen.
Okay, we're live. Jan. Jan, you're up. It's time. 9:03 now. No, it's time.
See all those pontoon boats sitting around the lakes.
I have to get it like this if I want to see over this thing. So good morning.
Morning.
And welcome to Heritage Sunday. The first written report of a worship service being held by the Scotch Irish was in 1724, the month of April. And that is why we celebrate Heritage Sunday, the last Sunday of April every year. But it was 299 years ago that there's a report by William Eggles, who was a historian, and he wrote notes and queries. And one of them was the fact that they held a worship service here, and there were 24 men and 1 woman at that service. And they were preached to by an itinerant minister. So it was kind of a last minute thing, I guess, that the minister came and all the men came to hear him preach. We do know that the cemetery was here in 1735 because that's when John Campbell's body was moved from Wingard's farm, where he died in 1734, and he was moved here into our cemetery. He was the first burial in our cemetery. For the longest time his stone was out there, but it has disappeared along with a lot of other stones. And we have a book over there, Paxton, Her Days and Her Ways, and it was written in 1913. And in that book she talks about a log cabin or a log house that was built in 1720, and it was on Wingard's farm. I've looked on maps of the old days, and I have found a Wingard's farm. It was just over the border of Derry Township in East Hanover Township, and I'm not sure where that line is, but apparently that's the farm where they did first worship here. And then when they moved into this area, I would assume it was 1724, but I'm not positive on that. And in 1929, it was the 250th anniversary, and our minister was Reverend Robert Taylor, and he wrote and gave a speech about the history of Derry, and it's in that booklet over there. But he does say this: the second building was erected almost on the identical spot on which this one stands, meaning the chapel. The date being uncertain, and was also of logs, covered with clapboards outside, and very primitively furnished within. This was 23 by 25, and it stood until 1769, when another similar building was erected. So that kind of tells me that maybe there was a 1720 building, and then another building, and then 1769. And the 1769 building, of course, was Old Derry. So, next will be Marion, and she'll talk to us about the 1732 building that we all know about.
Thanks, I think you all recognize that little house all covered in snow. What a great picture. And that was built in 1732. And it, William Bertrand was chosen to be our first minister, and we called this the pastor's and then named also the session house. So it was in 1732 that the building where Reverend Burton taught the children to read using the Bible. So it was the first school in the area. Over the years, it was a post office, and you can look for the slot, there's a slot in it, in the door, a library for the Derry Church community, and Sunday school rooms. In 1887, there was a wood coping on the cemetery wall and an addition. And is there a picture of that? Because it doesn't tell me to move that yet.
Oh, go to the next
The next
picture
one
and
is
see.
All right. Is that it?
There it is.
There
Look
it
at
is. Oh, okay, so you can see the addition, which is no longer there. Anyway, one addition was added to the west side, and a fireplace was used to heat. So you can see the pictures of the session house. The building was enclosed in glass in 1929 by Milton Hershey. Oh, that's again, the session house building without the enclosure. And now you see it with the glass house, and it has been listed on the National Historic Register since 2006 with the glass house, which has become a real issue for our Building and Grounds Committee because of all the golf balls that continue to break some of the glass. But I think there's an update on the session house. Has it just been?
From that elevation, in fact, you can see it leaning. Over a period of years, the beam that the north wall, which is what we're looking at, deteriorated, and the whole building started to lean in toward the cemetery wall. And so what they did this spring was to jack up the building and get rid of the rotten log, put a new log across the foundation, and the building had actually moved about 6 inches. And it's amazing that it didn't literally fall apart. But anyway, it's now been stabilized, and if you look at it, you can see it's now perfectly vertical and in line with the glass house, as opposed to that picture where you can see a definite leaning.
At one point, Ira Reed, I must say, stored his lawnmower and things in there, so it's been taken much better care of in the most recent years. And it was interesting when we were trying to get it registered in the National Historic Register, which was in 2006. The historians were very interested because they said this is one of the few log houses that is on the original ground upon which it was built. And so most of those log cabins that have been preserved have been moved to other places in parks and whatever. But this is on its original ground, which makes it so valuable to history and to Derry Church.
While you're on that, the east elevation and the south elevation, the one you can't see on the other side, in the last 5 years, in 2 phases, the church has put tempered glass in place. There you can see the west elevation. and the south elevation. That's all, the east elevation and the south elevation are now tempered glass. So hopefully, we'll, and we haven't for the last 3 years had any broken glass from golf balls. Before the tricentennial, we were signing a contract to replace all the broken glass. There's about 40 broken panes on the west elevation and the north elevation, but they'll be just replaced with normal plate glass.
Those of us who do volunteer gardening around here have uncovered lots of little golf balls all around this area, so.
I've read two separate occasions. One occasion, this is the oldest building in Pennsylvania on its original foundation.
Yeah, well, that's what I just said.
You said about it, it's one of the few that it's the oldest in Pennsylvania on its original foundation. And the second thing I've read is it's the oldest structure in Pennsylvania. That's new, I haven't read that before.
Where'd you read that?
I don't know, I just remember I saw it, and wow, so it's very historic, for sure.
Well, all the little buses and tour trolleys come by us, that's for sure.
Yeah.
You know, that's interesting because you'd think Pennsbury Manor,
Yeah,
Penn's home would have a structure that was built in the late 1600s.
yeah.
Because he came over in 1682. But they must have all been rebuilt, or, I don't know. That's fascinating.
So this is Old Derry. Whoops.
That's what it says. There it is.
Sorry about that. This is Old Derry, and it's facing north. And you can see the session house and the cemetery wall with the wood coping. It was measured 38 by 39, so it was a little bit bigger than that log cabin I talked about earlier. The walls and the ceilings were made of planks. And one central aisle reached across from north to south. And two cross aisles, one here and one over there, went from the east to the west. And the clapboards on the outside were at one time painted yellow, but the 35 pews within were enclosed with doors and surrounded on all sides with straight, high backs, which remained unpainted. The pulpit was suspended high on the east side and was approached by a narrow, winding stairway with a door at the top. And the pulpit was so high that the parson could not be seen below his white stock when he faced his congregation far below him. The pulpit on the wall on the east side of our sanctuary was from Old Derry, but it's not the original pulpit. This is the original pulpit. It's an octagonal shaped piece of wood.
So what's the pulpit that we have?
The pulpit that we have is rounded, whereas this, you can't really see, but it's,
You can see that the sides go back on the
the
sides.
sides here and here, and then the front part.
Yeah. So are you all familiar with where the other pulpit is in the sanctuary, up on the wall?
So if you look on the east transept of the sanctuary, you'll see the pulpit that we're talking about. And worshipers came for the day. There would be a service in the morning a break for lunch, and another service in the afternoon. And both services lasted for several hours, with a long sermon each time. Andrew Mitchell was the last minister of Derry to preach in Old Derry in 1874. And it was torn down in 1883. It does look pretty decrepit. The table and the chairs, you'll recognize them from the table and the chairs that are in the chapel today. They're the exact same ones. There is a picture of the chairs in very bad condition. There's no back to them. So they have been reconditioned and look nothing like those chairs.
Hey, Jan, we were at one time part of a circuit with Donegal, Paxton, and Silver Springs. And those other three congregations, the layouts of the church are exactly the same as what you showed. But those other three churches were all limestone, and they're still in existence today. Ours, built right on top of an area that's totally full of limestone, ends up wood. Is there any history as to why we never built a stone church like the other three?
We did in 1884.
But that was 100 and some years after, 150 years after the other ones were built.
You know, in 1894, we did not have a minister here. And so the records of Derry were kept up at Paxton Church in their attic. And believe it or not, but in 1894 they had a fire in their attic. And all of our records that were up there were destroyed. So we have no way of knowing any of this from that time previous. So.
And some of the pewters, the pieces that we're still using today.
Yeah, the pewter is still here. We use the pewter every Sunday in our worship service.
Well, I know that we loaned the chairs. Peter Siebert, when he was at the Dauphin County Historical Society, borrowed those chairs for an exhibit. I mean, they're really valuable chairs,
Yeah, even though they've been
even though they've been restored.
yes. I'm not sure when they were restored, probably in 1884 maybe, I don't know.
Authentic house over on the right.
That is the pulpit being installed
Yeah.
on the wall of the east transept. And there it is, all hanging in its
It
glory.
took us 15 years to get permission to get that up there.
And Don Chubb had a time of it, getting that cleaned up. It had been stored in the session house for I don't know how many years. And it was really messy and dirty. So he did that. Okay. And Jack is next with our story about the Memorial Chapel.
October 2nd, 1884 was a memorable day for the people of Derry. It was the laying of the cornerstone for the present-day chapel. gathered from far and wide were descendants of the early pastors and worshipers who listened to the deeds of the past and plans for the future. The cornerstone was laid by the descendants of the Reverend John Elder and former members of Derry. Notice the door. Stained glass windows were given in the memory of the pastors of Old Derry, as well as some of the prominent members. Sunday schools of different Presbyterian churches also gave windows. The descendants of John Elder contributed the round window above the chancel. Notice the west transept and the door to the bell tower. The other round window above the entrance to the chapel was given in memory of James Russell Sharon, whose pastorate spanned 36 years. There were only about 5 or 6 members of Derry, but they had a thriving Sunday school. One of our sources indicated there were about 80 people attending the Sunday school. And I think it's a reasonable assumption that in addition to the 5 or 6 members, there must have been a good number of attendees to the worship service after the Sunday school. The new building was dedicated in 1887. At times it was called the Stone Church. The pipe organ was purchased from the estate of Thomas Edison and was installed in the church during the summer of 1933. Thank you.
Go to the right. Go to the right. Up there.
It's a button over there.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to talk about the John Elder Memorial Chapel. A need for more Sunday school rooms was recognized in 1928, but it wasn't until 1934 that any action was taken. Contributions from descendants of John Elder once again came to the rescue of Derry. Ground was broken in January 1935, and the cornerstone was laid in February. By May, 2 classrooms were ready for use, and by July, the building was basically completed. That same year, on July 4th, Milton Hershey gifted $20,000 to every church in Hershey. The money was used to make additional changes to the vestibule, chancel, and to purchase new carpet and other needed equipment. Okay, that's all right. Notice the refurbished chairs behind the chancel and the ornamental wood. We now had the east transept, a bathroom, 4 new Sunday school rooms, and a social room, as well as an additional door into the building. J. Horace Ruby, who made the windows in the Hotel Hershey circular dining room, also did the beautiful stained glass windows in the John Elder Room and the Hammond Library. Dedication was held December 8th, 1935. The addition was debt-free. Now I am going to talk about the Christian Education Building. After World War II, and during the time Reverend Blair was minister, there was an increase in membership and the number of children attending Sunday school. It must have been quite chaotic during the Sunday school time. And where did they all meet? Once again, it was decided an addition was needed for more Sunday school rooms. The new education building was added to the east end of the chapel, which would be this end. It was a long building with large Sunday school rooms for the younger children. Steps led down to it from the east transept. On the ground level, under the rooms, was a large social room and a kitchen. A door and a stairway led up to the main door of this addition. The present fellowship hall was the main part of this building. The present room 6 and part of room 7 on the lower level was the kitchen. The issues room was the social room. Dedication was held November 11th, 1951. You can see the construction of this building. And then you can see Reverend Blair with all of the Sunday school children. And more of the construction as it takes shape. And then a rendering of the completion. Okay, and Jan's going to talk about the manse.
Actually, I don't know how many of you remember the manse. It was a beautiful building, a beautiful house. And it was built in 1924, and Reverend Taylor was the first minister to live with, and his family to live there. But, whoops.
What year was the manse built, do you know?
It was built in 1924. And this is what happened to it in 1993. In order to make room for the addition to the sanctuary. They had to, it was so sturdily built that they really had to come in and knock it down with a bulldozer. Another building that we had that we don't have anymore was the sexton's house. And here's a picture of it. It was built back here someplace. I'm not sure where, but you can see High Point up here. And there's not really much mention about this building. I don't know when it was built, and I don't know when it was torn down. but apparently it was torn down after, Milton Hershey bought some of the land back here. That's what I'm guessing.
Make way for the golf course.
What? In the 1960s, membership was about 500, and it was very crowded in the chapel. Can you imagine? They must have had 2 services, I'm not sure. Well, the chapel could not be enlarged, so a new building was planned. The groundbreaking, I think that's Abe Hostetter and John Angel
Right?
Yeah.
and Reverend Reed. And I'm not sure, we did have an associate minister at one time.
I think that's our senator, wasn't? No, maybe not. It looks like,
I was thinking maybe it was that associate minister that we had,
I don't know.
I can't think of what it, Murphy?
Who's on the left?
Hey,
Hey,
Oh, that's
hey,
it.
Hostetter.
Mhm.
Is more of the
I
groundbreaking.
know that. What, Harry Hershey was the superintendent of that, right? Or he built?
yeah, he was on the building committee,
Yeah, but maybe.
and Mo Haldeman was the contractor.
The A-frame at the north was the main entrance. The narthex was small, and there were no transepts. And the choir and the organ were above the chancel. On the south side of the building, behind the sanctuary, the rooms consisted of a lounge, a music room, a session room, and offices for the pastor and the secretary. And outside stairs led down to the manse, which was to the east of the church, kind of like where the playground area is today. Under the sanctuary, there were new Sunday school rooms, and the sanctuary windows were clear glass. We had no stained glass windows at that time. I wanted to say, when we had the dedication for the 1965 building, it was scheduled for December, and we had a snowstorm, and they had to put it off until January. So it wasn't dedicated until January of 1966. In the 1990s, we had some major changes to the original design. Whoops. That's what happened before.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyhow, major changes were made to the original design. The choir and the organ were lowered, The transepts were added. The main entrance was changed. And the lounge was added and the music room was added. All the rooms at the rear of the church, or the rear of the sanctuary, became fellowship hall and the kitchen. And the offices became the nursery. On the lower level, more Sunday school rooms were added, as well as the office suite. Changes were also made in 2014. The large narthex behind the sanctuary changed the demeanor of the church. People did not just walk in and sit down. They stopped and they talked to each other and they recognized visitors and they created friendships. We became the welcoming church that we are today. And that's our progression of church buildings from 1720, maybe, until now. 299 years. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned something.
What?
Do you have any questions? Oh, good, we did a good job.
That's right. That's right.
Wow, and it's only 20 out.
That's all right.
Is this compact history all printed up somewhere? You know, you put a lot of pieces together, all of you. And, you know, it's graspable, maybe for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, I said I learned, even I learned new things this week that I hadn't known.
No, it's not written up any